Section 1 of The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod by Henry Beston. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Outermost House by Henry Beston. Chapter 1. The Beach. Part 1. East and ahead of the coast of North America, some 30 miles and more from the inner shores of Massachusetts, there stands in the open Atlantic the last fragment of an ancient and vanished land. For 20 miles this last and outer earth faces the ever-hostile ocean in the form of a great eroded cliff of earth and clay, the undulations and levels of whose rim now stand 100, now 150 feet above the tides. Worn by the breakers and the rains, disintegrated by the wind, it still stands bold. Many earths compose it, and many gravels and sands stratified and intermingled. It has many colors, old ivory here, peat here, and here old ivory darkened and enriched with rust. At twilight, its rim lifted to the splendor in the west, the face of the wall becomes a substance of shadow and dark descending to the eternal unquiet of the sea. At dawn, the sun rising out of the ocean gilds it with a level silence of light which thins and rises and vanishes into day. At the foot of this cliff a great ocean beach runs north and south, unbroken, mile lengthening into mile, solitary and elemental, unsullied and remote, visited and possessed by the outer sea. These sands might be the end or the beginning of a world. Age by age the sea here gives battle to the land. Age by age the earth struggles for her own, calling to her defense her energies and her creations, bidding her plants steal down upon the beach, and holding the frontier sands in a net of grass and roots which the storms wash free. The great rhythms of nature, today so dully disregarded, wounded even, have here their spacious and primeval liberty. Cloud and shadow of cloud, wind and tide, tremor of night and day, journeying birds alight here and fly away again all unseen. Schools of great fish move beneath the waves. The surf flings its spray against the sun. Often spoken of as being entirely glacial, this bulwark is really an old land surfaced with a new. The seas broke upon these same ancient bounds long before the ice had gathered or the sun had fogged and cooled. There was once, so it would seem, a northern coastal plain. This crumbled at its rim. Time and catastrophe changed its level and its form, and the sea came inland over it through the years. Its last enduring frontier roughly corresponds to the wasted dike of the cliff. Moving down into the sea, later glaciations passed over the old beaches, and the fragments of the plains, and stumbling over them, heaped upon these sills their accumulated drift of gravels, sand, and stones. The warmer sea and time prevailing, the ice cliff retreated westward through its fogs, and presently the waves coursed into a new, a transformed, and lifeless land. So runs, as far as it is possible to reconstruct it in general terms, the geological history of Cape Cod. The east and west arm of the peninsula is a buried area of the ancient plain, the forearm, the glaciated fragment of a coast. The peninsula stands farther out to sea than any other portion of the Atlantic coast of the United States. It is the outermost of outer shores. Thundering in against the cliff, the ocean here encounters the last defiant bulwark of two worlds. Part 2. The cliff I write of and the bordering beach face the Atlantic on the forearm of the cape. This outer earth is now scarce more than a great dike or wall some 25 miles long and only 3 and 4 miles wide. At Provincetown it rises from the sea, beginning there in a desert of dunes and sand plains of the ocean's making. These sands curve inland toward the continent, bending toward Plymouth, even as a hand may be bent down at the wrist, and Provincetown Harbor lies in the curve of palm and fingers. At Truro, the wrist of the cape, the forearm simile being both exact and inescapable, the land curve falls from the east and west down through an arc to the north and south, and the earth cliff begins and rises rather suddenly to its greatest elevation. South by east from the Highland Light to Eastham and the Nauset Coast Guard Station, the rampart fronts the sea, its skyline being now a progress of long undulations, and now a level as military as a battlement. Hollows and mounded hills are here and there, revealing the barren moorland character of the country just above. At Nauset, the cliff ends, the sea invades the narrowing land, and one enters the kingdom of the dunes. The cliff ends, and a wall of ocean dunes carries on the beach. 5 miles long, this wall ends at a channel over whose entrance shoals the ocean sweeps daily into a great inlet or lagoon back of the dunes, an inlet spaced with the floors of tidal islands and traced with winding creeks, the inlet of Eastham and Orleans. Very high tides covering the islands sometimes turn this space into bay. Westward over the channels and the marshland one looks to the uplands of the cape, here scarce a good 2 miles wide. At Eastham the land is an open rolling moor. West over this lies Cape Cod Bay. A powerful tribe of Indians, the Nausets, once inhabited this earth between the seas. Outermost cliff and solitary dune, the plain of ocean and the far bright rims of the world, meadowland and marsh and ancient moor, this is Eastham, this is the outer cape. Sun and moon rise here from the sea. The arched sky has an ocean vastness. The clouds are now of ocean, now of earth. Having known and loved this land for many years, it came about that I found myself free to visit there, and so I built myself a house upon the beach. My house stood by itself atop a dune a little less than halfway south on Eastham Bar. I drew the homemade plans for it myself, and it was built for me by a neighbor and his carpenters. When I began to build, I had no notion whatever of using the house as a dwelling place. I simply wanted a place to come to in the summer, one cozy enough to be visited in winter could I manage to get down. I called it the forecastle. It consisted of 2 rooms, a bedroom and a kitchen living room, and its dimensions overall were but 20 by 16. A brick fireplace with its back to the wall between rooms heated the larger space and took the chill off the bedroom, and I used a 2-burner oil stove when cooking. My neighbor built well. The house, even as I hoped, proved compact and strong, and it was easy to run and easy to heat. The larger room was sheathed, and I painted the wainscoting and the window frames a kind of buff fawn, a good forecastle color. The house showed perhaps a somewhat amateur enthusiasm for windows. I had 10. In my larger room I had 7, a pair to the east opening on the sea, a pair to the west commanding the marshes, a pair to the south, and a small look-see in the door. 7 windows in one room perched on a hill of sand under an ocean sun. The words suggest cross-lights and a glare, a fair misgiving, and one I countered by the use of wooden shutters originally meant for winter service, but found necessary through the year. By arranging these, I found I could have either the most sheltered and darkened of rooms, or something rather like an inside out of doors. In my bedroom I had 3 windows, one east, one west, and one north to Nauset light. To get drinking water, I drove a well pipe directly down into the dune. Though the sea and the beach are alongside, and the marsh channels course daily into the west, there is fresh water here under the salty sand. This water varies in quality, some of it being brackish, some of it sweet and clear. To my great delight, I chanced upon a source which seemed to me as good water as one may find here anywhere. Beneath the floor the pipe descended into a bricked-up and covered pit housing a petcock, through which I drained the water from the pump in freezing weather. On bitter days, I simply pumped a few pails full and stood them in the sink, and drained the pump immediately. I had 2 oil lamps and various bottle candlesticks to read by, and a fireplace crammed full of driftwood to keep me warm. I have no doubt that the fireplace heating arrangement sounds demented, but it worked, and my fire was more than a source of heat. It was an elemental presence, a household god, and a friend. In my larger room I had a chest of drawers painted an honest carriage blue, a table, a wall bookcase, a couch, 2 chairs, and a rocker. My kitchen, built yacht fashion, all in a line, stood at my southern wall. First came a dish and crockery cupboard, then a space for the oil stove. I kept this boxed in when not in use. Then a shelf, a porcelain sink, and the corner pump. Blessed pump! It never failed me or indulged in nerves. Using a knapsack, I carried my supplies on my own shoulders. There is no road through the dunes, and even if there were, no one would have made deliveries. West of the dunes, it is true there exists a kind of trail on which Fords may venture, but even the most experienced of the villagers are wary of it and tell of being mired there or stuck in the sand. Nevertheless, my lumber came by this trail, and now and then I could get my oil cans carried down by a neighbor who had a horse and cart. These helps, however, were but occasional, and I counted myself fortunate to have had them at all. My knapsack remained the only ever-ready wagon of the dunes. Twice a week, by arrangement, a friend met me at Nauset Station with the car, took me shopping to Eastham or Orleans, and brought me back again to Nauset. And there I would pack my milk and eggs and butter and rolls, being very careful as to which was sitting on which, and strike off down the beach along the breakers. The top of the mound I built on stands scarce 20 feet above the high water mark, and only 30 in from the great beach. The coast guards at Nauset, a scant 2 miles away, were my only neighbors. South lay the farther dunes and a few far-away and lonely gunning camps. The floor of marsh and tide parted me on the west from the village and its distant cottages. The ocean besieged my door. North and north alone had I touch with human things. On its solitary dune my house faced the 4 walls of the world. My house completed and tried, and not found wanting by a first Cape Cod year, I went there to spend a fortnight in September. The fortnight ending, I lingered on, and as the year lengthened into autumn, the beauty and mystery of this earth and outer sea so possessed and held me that I could not go. The world today is sick to its thin blood for lack of elemental things, for fire before the hands, for water welling from the earth, for air, for the dear earth itself underfoot. In my world of beach and dune these elemental presences lived and had their being, and under their arch there moved an incomparable pageant of nature and the year. The flux and reflux of ocean, the incomings of waves, the gatherings of birds, the pilgrimages of the peoples of the sea. Winter and storm, the splendor of autumn and the holiness of spring, all these were part of the great beach. The longer I stayed, the more eager I was to know this coast and to share its mysterious and elemental life. I found myself free to do so. I had no fear of being alone. I had something of a field naturalist's inclinations. Presently I made up my mind to remain and try living for a year on Eastham Beach. Part 3. The sandbar of Eastham is the sea-wall of the inlet. Its crest overhangs the beach, and from the high, wind-trampled rim a long slope well overgrown with dune grass descends to the meadows on the west. Seen from the tower at Nauset, the land has an air of geographical simplicity. As a matter of fact, it is full of hollows, blind passages, and amphitheaters in which the roaring of the sea changes into the far roar of a cataract. I often wander into these curious pits. On their floors of sand, on their slopes, I find patterns made by the feet of visiting birds. Here, in a little disturbed and claw-marked space of sand, a flock of larks has alighted. Here one of the birds has wandered off by himself. Here are the deeper tracks of hungry crows. Here the webbed impressions of a gull. There is always something poetic and mysterious to me about these tracks in the pits of the dunes. They begin at nowhere, sometimes with the faint impression of an alighting wing, and vanish as suddenly into the trackless nowhere of the sky. Below the eastern rim the dunes fall into steeps of sand to the beach. Walking the beach close in along these steps, one walks in the afternoon shade of a kind of sand escarpment, now 7 or 8 feet high and reasonably level, now 15 or 20 feet high to the top of a dome or mound. In 4 or 5 places storms have washed gullies or cuts clean through the wall. Dune plants grow in these dry beds, rooting themselves in under old half-buried wreckage. Clumps of dusty miller, Artemisia stellariana, being the most familiar green. The plant flourishes in the most exposed situations. It jumps from the dune rim to the naked slopes. It even tries to find a permanent station on the beach. Silvery gray-green all summer long, in autumn it puts on gold and russet golden colorings of singular delicacy and beauty. The grass grows thickest on the slopes and shoulders of the mounds. Its tall leaves enclosing intrusive heads and clumps of the thick-fleshed dune goldenrod. Still lower down the slope, where the sands open and the spears rise thin, the beach pea catches the eye with its familiar leaf and faded topmost bloom. Lower still, on desert-like floors, are tussock mats of poverty grass, and the flat green stars of innumerable spurges. The only real bushes of the region are beach plum thickets, and these are few and far between. All these plants have enormously long tap roots, which bury themselves deep in the moist core of the sands. The greater part of the year I have 2 beaches, one above, one below. The lower or tidal beach begins at mean low water and climbs a clean slope to the high water mark of the average low course tide. The upper beach, more of a plateau in form, occupies the space between high water and the dunes. The width of these beaches changes with every storm and every tide, but I shall not be far out if I call them both an average 75 feet wide. Unseasonable storm tides and high course tides make of the beach one vast new floor. Winter tides narrow the winter's upper beach, and often sweep across it to the dunes. The whole beach builds up in summer as if each tide pushed more and more sand against it out of the sea. Perhaps currents wash in sand from the outer bars. It is no easy task to find a name or a phrase for the color of Eastham sand. Its tone, moreover, varies with the hour and the seasons. One friend says yellow on its way to brown, another speaks of the color of raw silk. Whatever color images these hints may offer to a reader's mind, the color of the sand here on a June day is as warm and rich a tone as one may find. Late in the afternoon there descends upon the beach and the bordering sea a delicate overtone of faintest violet. There is no harshness here in the landscape line, and no hard northern brightness or brusque revelation. There is always reserve and mystery, always something beyond the earth and sea, something which nature, honoring, conceals. The sand here has a life of its own, even if it is only a life borrowed from the wind. One pleasant summer afternoon, while a high gusty westerly was blowing, I saw a little wind devil, a miniature tornado 6 feet high, rush at full speed out of a cut, whirl itself full of sand upon the beach, and spin off breakerward. As it crossed the beach the devil caught the sun, and there burst out of the sand smoke a brownish prism of burning, spinning, and fantastic color. South of me the dune I call Big Dune now and then goes through a curious performance. Seen lengthwise, the giant has the shape of a wave, its slope to the beach being a magnificent fan of purest wind-blown sand, its westward slope a descent to a sandy amphitheater. During a recent winter, a Coast Guard key post was erected on the peak of the dune. The feet of the night patrols trod down and nicked the crest, and presently this insignificant notch began to work and deepen. It is now 8 or 9 feet wide and as many deep. From across the marshes it might be a kind of great roundish bite out of the crest. On windy autumn days, when the sand is still dry and alive, and westerly gusts and currents take on a genuine violence, the loose sand behind the dune is whirled up by the wind and poured eastward through this funnel. At such times the peak smokes like a volcano. The smoke is now a streaming blackish plume, now a thin old ivory wraith, and it billows, eddies, and pours out as from a sea Vesuvius. Between the dunes and the marshes and a regular width of salt hay land extends from the sand slopes to the marshier widths of tidal land along the creeks. Each region has its own grasses, the meadows being almost a patchwork of competing growths. In the late summer and the autumn, the marsh lavender, thin-strewn but straying everywhere, lifts its cloud of tiny sun-faded flowers above the tawny, almost deer-colored grasses. The marsh islands beyond are but great masses of thatch grass, rising from floors of sodden mud and sand. There are hidden pools in these unvisited acres which only sunset reveals. The wild ducks know them well and take refuge in them when stalked by gunners. How singular it is that so little has been written about the birds of Cape Cod. The peninsula, from an ornithologist's point of view, is one of the most interesting in the world. The interest does not center on the resident birds, for they are no more numerous here than they are in various other pleasant places. It lies in the fact that living here one may see more kinds and varieties of birds than it would seem possible to discover in any one small region. At Eastham, for instance, among the visitors and migrants, residents and casuals, I had land birds and moor birds, marsh birds and beach birds, sea birds and coastal birds, even birds of the outer ocean. West Indian hurricanes, moreover, often catch up and fling ashore here curious tropical and semi-tropical forms. A glossy ibis in one storm, a frigate bird in another. When living on the beach, I kept a particularly careful lookout during gales. I close this chapter with what seems to me the most interesting detail for a naturalist's ear. Eastham Bar is only 3 miles long and scarce a quarter of a mile wide across its sands. Yet, in this little world, nature has already given her humbler creatures a protective coloration. Stop at the Coast Guard station and catch a locust on the station lawn. We have the maritime locust here, Trimerotropsis maritima Harris, and having caught him, study him well. You will find him tinted with green. Go 50 feet into the dunes and catch another, and you shall see an insect made of sand. The spiders, too, are made of sand. The phrase is none too strong. And so are the toads that go beachcombing on moonlit summer nights. One may stand at the breaker's edge and study a whole world in one's hand. So, choosing to remain upon the beach, I look forward to October and winter and the great migrations. Earliest autumn and September now enclose the earth. My western windows are most beautiful in early evening. On these lovely cool September nights, the level and quiescent dust of light which fills the sky is as autumnal in its coloring as the earth below. There is autumn on the earth and autumn overhead. The great isles of tawny orange smoldering into darkness. The paths of the channels stilled to twilight bronze. The scarlet meadows deepening to levels of purple and advancing night. All these mount in exhalation of color to the heavens. The beam of Nauset entering my northern casement brushes a recurrent pallor of light across a part of my bedroom wall. A first flash, a second flash, a third flash, and then a little interval as the dark sector of the lens travels between the forecastle and the flame. On bright moonlit nights I can see both the whitewashed tower and the light. On dark nights I can only see the light itself suspended and secured above the earth. It is dark tonight, and over the plains of the ocean the autumnal sky rolls up the winter stars. End of Chapter 1. Read by Shelley Weingart. March 2024, Wareham, Massachusetts.